Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to my June reading wrap up. I know this fan is going to get super annoying. I might have to fan myself every so often because it genuinely is like an oven in this room right now. I honestly was going to put off filming this. I've been trying to leave it as late as I possibly can. This is as late as I can leave it. I need to film now and it's still like an oven and I just want to get in the shower and cool off, and it just, look, I love summer, I really do, and I don't want to complain about it because when it rains it's just shit, but yeah, I feel like I'm boiling alive. I'm just sweaty and I can't get away from it. So I'm going to try and wave this as little as I possibly can so I don't distract the mic, and also I know it's just going to be really annoying in the video, so I'm going to fan myself off right now and then put it down. So I had a really good reading month in June and I mainly wanted to push myself to read a bunch. One, because I had some time off, and two, because I had a really bad reading month in May. I think in May I read one or two books. I think it might have been two books. It was a really bad month. So June kind of had to be a redeeming month for me, and I did redeem it. I clawed it back and I managed to read a total of 10 books. Those also varied in genre, so it was a nice kind of well-rounded month in terms of what I was reading, and to be honest, I read some really good books, so I'm definitely back on the reading train again, although I'm not gonna lie, it's gone downhill a bit for me now. But enough of me rambling on, let's get on with the June wrap-up. So the first book that I read in June was a thriller, and it's actually a 2025 thriller, and that is You Killed Me First by John Mars. Now this one surprised me because for some reason I automatically go into thrillers thinking that they're going to be by American authors. This one was actually set in the UK and it was British characters, which always, I don't know why, disturbs me a little bit. I just go in expecting American characters and then when it's not, I'm like, whoa, okay, was not expecting that. I don't know why, I think I just maybe consume a little bit too much American entertainment. Anyway, this one is essentially following three women who all live on the same kind of like quiet suburban street / neighborhood, and what was originally a two-person friendship group eventually turns into a three-person friendship group because this new lady moves onto the street, and somehow their lives end up intertwining, all leading up to this point that is revealed to you right at the beginning of the book that is very shocking. That is all I want to say, because I feel as if this is the kind of book that you need to go in knowing absolutely nothing. When I tell you, this had one of the best book openings that I have ever read. This had me gripped. I just wish that this book had the same momentum throughout. I do feel as if it dropped off towards the end, only because after the big reveal that happens, there's kind of, so let me just put it this way, the first chapter of the book is a big event that happens, and everything in the book is leading up to this big event and revealing who the characters are who are involved and, you know, how it happened. And once that big reveal happens, you still have about 20% of the book left to go, and I found after that point it just dropped off a bit. There was also a lot of real world references, and by that I mean there were references to TikTok and OnlyFans, and I know that this is technically set in the real world. I don't know why, and maybe it's just a me thing. I definitely think this is a personal preference, but I don't like nods to real life things or like pop culture. I feel as if it takes me out of the book a lot. I don't know why, but when I read books, regardless of whether they're in fantasy worlds or real worlds, I just feel like all of my fictional books take place in a different, like a separate universe. It doesn't matter what they are or where they're set, they're just in their own universe, right? Even if a book is taking place on Earth, it's not Earth to me. It's, I don't know, this sounds like I'm having a trip, I promise. It makes sense in my head. I just don't like references to real world things, like things that I know about in pop culture and other things. Like I don't like it, especially TikTok. When TikTok's mentioned, straight out the book. What I will say though is this is definitely a really great women behaving badly book. These women were unhinged and it was brilliant. It definitely kept me gripped. Like I didn't hate the book, it just died off for me. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was okay. It's one that I would be like, yeah, like maybe it's worth a read, but like don't think that you're gonna absolutely lose your mind over it. So then the next book that I read in June was Watch Me by Tahara Murphy. This is Tahara Murphy's new series set in the same world as the Shatter Me series. This takes place, I believe, I don't know if it's like, I think it's 10 years after the events of Shatter Me, I think it's 10 years. But all you basically need to know is that this book is now following James, who is the brother of someone who evades my mind right now. Yeah, I promise I read these books. I promise. I honestly, this feels like a decade ago. This feels like a decade ago that I read these now. Sorry, we're gonna have to fan because I feel like I'm getting really sweaty and really hot. But yeah, essentially this book is following James, who we do meet in the first series. At that point, he's like a young kid, and basically he wants to try and impress Aaron and all of the other characters who have done all of these really like badass things, and he kind of feels like he's being babied, and so he wants to kind of prove himself, and to prove himself he decides to try and infiltrate Ark Island, which is the last remaining refuge of the Re-establishment. And with Ark Island comes in our other character named Rosabelle, who is essentially an assassin of sorts for the Re-establishment. She's basically trying to survive. She's trying to keep her sister alive and safe. They don't have their parents anymore, and she's just kind of like following orders, and her life becomes intertwined with James's, and so the story goes from there. This definitely has all of the things that I loved about the Shatter Me series. It was such an easy book to read. The whole time I was reading this, all I could think was, we are so back. I loved seeing all of the older characters pop up, and I'm gonna be honest, I feel as if like you could literally go 20 years and this book would still feel kind of connected with the Shatter Me series. Like, I sometimes feel when authors revisit old worlds that they used to write, I feel as if there's always a disconnect, and you can kind of tell that they're not in the same mindset anymore and that they just don't feel the same. This book felt like Shatter Me to me, and I definitely think you could go from having read Shatter Me when it first released to now reading this and still really enjoy it. I will say the world building and stuff is still very wishy-washy to me. I don't think it's the best, but for a light-hearted, like action-packed, like really good yearning slow burn romance kind of vibe, this book had it all, and genuinely I loved it just as much as Shatter Me. Again, I don't like, when I say I love it, it's not the peak of literature, but it was just really entertaining and really fun. So I did end up giving this one 4 stars. I cannot wait to read on with this series. The only thing that disappoints me is the fact that now I have to wait, because when I read Shatter Me, I read them back to back. So then the next book that I read in June was actually a book on my 2025 TBR, and that is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. So this book is essentially following 2 guys who were in college who basically did this experiment to see whether they could create superheroes or just people with these extraordinary abilities, and something ends up going very wrong, or some might say very right, and they end up being very successful. However, it ends up being that one of them gets arrested and thrown in prison. And so for the majority of the story, we are following, well, to be fair, we follow both characters. It's told in a dual perspective. I think it might be told in several different perspectives, but mostly we are following the story through Victor and Eli. Victor was the one that broke out of prison, and now he wants revenge, and he basically wants to kill Eli for what he did. And this book is definitely a big kind of like anti-hero vibe. There's no kind of black and white, you know, good and evil when it comes to this book. There's a very kind of like mixed grey area. I think this book had so many great qualities to it. I think that it had really good pacing. I also really liked the dual timeline. I think that when it's done really well, which it was done in this book really, really well, it can be incredible. And honestly, I felt so immersed in the history of these characters and what they had been through, but I also felt so connected to the current present timeline, and I think that it just flowed so effortlessly in this book, and I was just so drawn into these characters and their stories. I also really loved reading from the point of view of flawed villains, because these guys are, you're reading from the perspective of villains. These guys aren't superheroes, even though they think they are. One of them especially thinks he's like the savior of the world, but you realise they're just all really shitty people. I just loved that because it felt so refreshing. I'm so used to reading books where, you know, you've got very morally grey characters, but like in some way they seem like pretty good. These characters were just awful. They were bad. And I also really enjoyed the fact that this book seemed quite character-centered, although it did have a really good plot. I think when I read, there's usually like one or the other. Either it's really character-centered or it's really plot-centered, and I felt like this book kind of had a happy medium, and I really enjoyed that, because I think sometimes one of the aspects can get lost over the other, but I felt like there was a good mix in this book. I really enjoyed it. I can't wait to read on, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It was also my first ever V.E. Schwab book, and I am happy to say I will definitely be reading more of her books. So then the next book that I read in June was Broken by Karen Slaughter. This is the 4th book in the Will Trent series. I cannot remember for the life of me. I think it's the 4th book. I get kind of lost because I always read one of these a year for some reason, and I need to start reading them more often. So without going into details of what this book is about, because I don't want to spoil the other books, I mean, to be fair, no, I was going to say you can jump in wherever with this series. I mean, you could if you just wanted to read it for the crime. The issue with this series, or like a Karen Slaughter series, is they are very kind of like character-centered. So there are storylines going on with characters that you wouldn't necessarily understand if you just jumped in halfway through. Essentially, the Will Trent series is obviously centered around a guy named Will Trent, and he is a special agent with the... Hang on, let me think about this. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, I believe. I might be wrong. I'm pretty sure that's what he is. And essentially each book, because these are crime thrillers, centre around a different crime, and not only that, but you're kind of like following other storylines to do with the characters. Like, they have shit going on, okay? Like, there's romances, there's drama, there's toxic relationships, there's other stuff going on alongside, obviously, the crimes. I have to say, I feel like I say this every time I finish a Will Trent book, but I think this might be my favourite so far. This book actually centres around a character that we meet in the Grant County series, which is the series that I would suggest reading before this one. You don't have to, but I think it helps. But this one was so emotionally charged because of the plot that this book was following, because this does actually take place in Grant County. We revisit some old characters and stuff since Grant County went down, and honestly, like, this book made me tear up. It made me cry. I'm not gonna lie, it made me cry, and it made me scream, and with excitement, I might add. And also, I just, I have a ship that hasn't set sail yet, and it almost set sail in this book, and I'm still waiting. Karen Slaughter is the biggest tease ever when it comes to romances, especially in Will Trent, because I know it's going to happen, but I need it to happen now. Like, she's edging me and it's not good. I will say that there was a character in this book that I still very much hate, and I know this character is probably going to pop up again when I least expect it, and I'm not looking forward to it because this character literally has 0 development. This character is just a shitty person, and they never learn from their mistakes, and I hate them. Like, there are characters that I hated before, but like, this goes beyond hate. This goes to white pure rage. Like, white, the purest bright white you can think of. That's how ragey this character makes me. I hate them. The only downside to this book that I would say is that I wasn't as invested in the crime in this book. I honestly, a little underwhelming. I found it a little underwhelming. I was mainly invested in the characters and the relationships that were going on between characters, and kind of like finding out what had happened since the end of Grant County to certain people. That was what I was here for. The crime, I was like, meh. You know, I felt, I didn't guess what it was. I didn't guess at all. I had no idea what was going on. But I honestly, I almost feel like the crime took a backseat in this book. Like, I don't feel like this book was written for the crime. And that's okay. And I still enjoyed it. And as for what I rated this one, I gave it 4 stars. I absolutely love the Will Trent series. Will Trent is my comfort character, and I don't know why, because the guy has issues. So then the next book that I read in June was The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, and I'm going to be honest, I did start reading this one physically, and then I switched to the audiobook just because I felt like I was getting in a little bit of DNF territory, or like slumpy territory, and I think the main reason for that is because I have already watched the show and I wanted to read the book because of the show, and it ended up being a lot different to what I thought it was going to be, and I'm blaming the show. but the show is really good. So if you don't know what the Handmaid's Tale is about, it's basically this dystopian version of America where basically this kind of like what I would explain as religious extremists have basically taken over, and there are women that they call handmaids that basically live and work to serve, I can't remember what they call them, it's not masters, but basically they're masters. There's these really powerful guys that live in these homes with their wives, and basically these handmaids are sent there to breed for them. They are raped and they're used as breeding cattle. Like, there we go, that's basically the plot. That's America now. Along with that, there's obviously like loads of really awful rules and punishments, and it's just not the kind of world that you'd want to live in as a woman. So the first thing that I'll say is I did find it a little bit hard to feel emotionally connected to the story just because of the way that it was written. It has got very beautiful like poetic prose in it, and I do think that it helps if you haven't seen the show first. Obviously that's a me problem. So I did end up switching to audio because of that, and I will say that I felt like the audiobook resonated with me more than the physical book did, and I think part of that was because it was actually narrated by, I cannot remember her name, but everyone judges her for being a Scientologist. I'm not going to go there, it is a cult, but you do you, boo. But it was narrated by her, and she was the actual one that played June in the show, so I do feel like I connected with it more just because it did feel like I was watching the show again by hearing her voice. I think because I already knew what the world looked like, and because I already knew what was going on and all of that stuff, I did just find it really hard to take myself out of what the show was and put myself in the book. But it was a me problem, okay? I don't really have much else to say about this book other than that. What I will say is though, I was kind of shocked by the ending. Obviously I've seen the show, I know how the show ends, was not expecting the book to end up the way that it did. And if you have read the book, you'll know what I mean. It was very, very, very different, and I'm actually kind of glad that I read it because of that, because now I know what the ending actually was. And honestly, it threw me off because there were actually two other narrators in this book, and one played, oh, what is her name? Aunt Lydia, there we go. The woman who played Aunt Lydia has a little narration in this, and also the guy who played Lawrence has a narration in this as well. So I was really thrown off because I was like, what is this? Like, is this the movie? Is this just the movie cast? Like, I didn't realise this. I really enjoyed the audiobook, and to be honest, once I switched to the audiobook, I really did enjoy the story. I think it really resonates just because of how awful it is, but I don't know, I think I went in with too many high expectations and they were dampened a little bit. I am not gonna lie, I just moved the camera down, so if you see the switch, that is why you're not going mad. The next book that I read in June was A Man Called Uva by Frederick Backman. This is my second ever Frederick Backman book. Actually, this is my first full-length Frederick Backman book, but the first book that I've read from him was a short story. And essentially, this is what it sounds like. It's a book following a guy named Uva who has had kind of like a very interesting life. He basically is a really grumpy guy that lives on the street, and one day these new neighbours move in and they're just really loud and bubbly and happy. Basically everything that is the opposite of what Uva is. And as the story goes on, you kind of get a feel for who Uva is and what he's been through and what made him the way that he is. But at some point things change, and you know, he ends up making, you know, friends with these people, and you just kind of like see his life play out. Now the reason that I read this was because I googled books that make you cry, and this was one of the ones that popped up, and for some reason I was gravitating towards it. I just felt like crying. Actually, yeah, I was trying to think of why I wanted to cry, and then I remembered, and you know what, it was worth it. So the first thing that I will say, which I have noticed in the other book that I read by this author, is that sometimes the dialogue feels a little bit forced, and for some reason it just feels as if it lacks any realistic flow. He seems to put a lot of exclamation points for a lot of stuff, and it honestly just throws me off because it almost gives this kind of vibe that people are talking like this, you know, and it honestly is just so weird to read. And I don't love the dialogue in his book so far, because I noticed he did it in his short stories as well, and I just didn't like the way that characters were interacting with each other, because it just like it just read really weirdly. I also feel as if some of the humour was very forced as well, which I didn't love. Some of it was trying to be funny and it wasn't. I will also say that there was some repetitive writing as well, which I noticed, which also happened in this short story. Having said that, did I cry? Yes. Yes, I did. I knew where the book was going to go. I kind of like knew what the final result was going to be, because I you know, when you Google books that are going to make you cry and it's about an old man named Uwe, you know where it's going, right? Like, even by me saying that, you've got to know where I'm going with that and what's going to happen in the book. But yes, yeah, I cried ugly tears. I cried ugly tears. And the other thing that I thought was really weird was that, okay, this book is following an old man named Uwe, right? This guy isn't even that old. He's like 59. 59 is not old. I was honestly picturing a 70, 80-year-old man who was like really cranky. This guy was 59. That's not old. That's really not old. But the one redeeming quality about this book, because I feel like I've said a lot of negative stuff, is the fact that I really liked the flashbacks in this book. I feel like the flashbacks were a big redeeming quality throughout. I just felt way more connected to Uwe. I honestly, they were kind of gut punching, because every time a flashback would happen of something that had happened to him in his past, they honestly felt really emotional, and those were done really well. So overall, this one was okay. I'm still not fully on the Frederick Backman hype train, because I know a lot of people really love his stuff and I can see why. I'm just not quite there. So I gave this one 3 stars. It was okay and it did make me cry. So it did its job. So then the next book that I read in June was also on my 2025 TBR, and that is Beautiful Creatures by Cami Garcia and Margaret Stoll. Now, this is a old school YA book, and it's basically following this guy named Ethan who keeps having these weird dreams about this girl that he's never met. And one day when he goes into a school, lo and behold, she's there, the girl that's been showing up in his dreams, and the dreams are really weird. In the dreams, you know, he's trying to save her and, you know, crazy stuff is happening. This is like a paranormal romance, so it has all of those kind of like old school, stereotypical, you know, plot twists and plot points that you would expect to find in an old school, you know, paranormal romance book. Guys, I'm not gonna lie, I went into this one with high expectations. It was bad. It was bad. I didn't like it at all. I actually really fucking hate this book. You know, I don't expect to go into old school YA and absolutely love the pants off it, but a couple of years ago, I read the Vampire Academy series for the first time, and I absolutely ate that stuff up. I loved that series. It aged really well. Was it a little bit cringy in some parts? Yes, but it was so fun and like so action-packed, and I was so invested. It was just really good. Like, it aged well in that way. There are just some books that do age well. This is not one of them. I don't even think this aged well when it came out. It was really bad. I didn't like it. So the first bad thing that I would say is this is the first thing that I wasn't expecting. Okay, I've given you plot of this book, so it kind of makes it obvious, but when you read what this book is about on Goodreads, it's less obvious. But basically, this is told from Ethan's perspective, which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting it to maybe be a little bit in the girl's perspective, but it wasn't. It was all in Ethan's perspective. And honestly, it's really weird to read, because although this is a Mal's perspective, it's written by 2 women, and you can tell. I give shit to men all the time when you read a female perspective in a book and you know it's written by a man, because there are just telltale signs. Turns out some women can't write from the male perspective either. Ethan just came across a little bit too feminine, and I don't mean to say that in a bad way. Like, I am all for guys being in touch with their feminine side, but he read like a girl. He read like a teenage girl, and it was odd to read. And because of that, I almost feel as if this book would have been better if it was written in 3rd person. I just failed to connect to it because of that. And honestly, on this kind of topic of Ethan, he brushed stuff off that he shouldn't have brushed off. This guy was finding out about all of this wacky shit that was going on. This guy, right, would wake up from dreams and his window would be open and he'd be covered in mud or whatever, and he wouldn't question it. It'd be like, oh, that was weird. Oh, on to another day. Like, this guy, it was just... It was so bad. It was also really incredibly long when it didn't need to be, and there was also a lot of like repetitive storytelling going on, and honestly like the perspective thing was also really weird considering the whole story literally revolves around this girl in the story, and yet it's told from Ethan's perspective. I will say I managed to find the audiobook somewhere, and I thought, oh, let me just see if I can, you know, listen to the audiobook on a really crazy speed. The audiobook is so fucking weird. There's first of all, the accents in it are just, oh my god, the voices are just bad. And not only that, there are sound effects. There's this song that pops up in the book and they actually sing it with music in the audiobook, and there's like lightning sound effects. It's so fucking weird. It's so fucking weird. This book was so bad I almost DNF'd, but I was filming a reading vlog with it, and I'm pretty sure I think I'm doing a reading vlog with it. I can't remember what that reading vlog is. I'm gonna be honest, I did film some clips with it, and I don't know what the reading vlog is. Yeah, no, I can't remember. You might see a reading vlog with it in, you might not. Anyway, I gave this 1 star because it was really fucking bad. And I will not be continuing on with that series. So then the next book that I decided to read was actually my one non-fiction audiobook for the month, which I realised in May I completely missed out. I just really wasn't in the mood to listen to anything, which is fine, like sometimes that happens. But in June I decided to listen to I Let Him Go by Denise Fergus. So Denise Fergus is the mother of James Bulger, who was tragically killed, or I should say murdered, in the 90s. I think in 1993. I think he was 2 years younger than me. Okay, I don't know what year it was. It was in the 90s. But essentially, one day when Denise went shopping, she literally let go of James for like literally a second, and in this second that, you know, she was paying for something and, you know, he had let go of her hand or whatever, James ended up walking off, and he walked off into the hands of these 2 boys who I can't remember how old they were, but they were very, very young. They were like 10 or 11, something like that. But essentially these 2 boys murdered him, and the details have never been fully released because apparently they are really awful, and Denise herself doesn't even know what happened to her son fully, although I think in the book she did say they can cross out sexual assault, I think, because she did ask and the guy was like, no, like, I can promise you now that didn't happen. I think that's what she said in the book. I can't remember fully. But essentially this book was written by her, and it was all about kind of like her version of what happened, what she went through during that time, and like how she's dealing with it now, and like how she looks back on that. I really wanted to read this because I love reading and like listening to books about people who have had crime affect them. I think that it's better to listen to their stories than listen to any books that are about, you know, the actual murderers or whatever. This was such a poignant read. There were multiple times during this audiobook when I genuinely found it really hard to listen to, and I'm not a very maternal person myself, but there were points in this book where I could really honestly appreciate what she felt as a mother, because I honestly couldn't ever imagine being in that position. I didn't honestly realise how young she was as well when she went through that. Like, considering how old I am now, I think I want to say she was like 22 or 23 when all of this happened. She was so young, and she got so much shit in the press for what happened, and I can't even imagine like how she feels because of that. It was a really good, insightful look into the idea of secondary victims of crimes, because obviously we always know about kind of like the victims themselves, but it's not often that we actually look at those who are left behind, and those people themselves are victims as well. So this was a really, really great read. Obviously, it made me cry. It also made me incredibly angry at times because, for those of you who don't know this case, like, this is a case that if you say it to anyone in the UK, they will know what you're on about. If you say James Bulger, they just automatically know, because it was so horrific having these 2 young boys kill this like really innocent little kid when they were supposed to be kids themselves. And one of the things that still makes people angry is the fact that, well, so these guys got a very small sentence. I think they got released when they were 17 or 18, so they weren't serving time for long. They also weren't in a proper prison. They were in like a youth type prison, but it wasn't really a prison. It was more kind of like they were locked away as youth, but they had all of the luxuries of, you know, games, consoles and all of that stuff. And when they were released, they, because of the taxpayer, were given secret identities. And one of them has gone on to not reoffend. The other one keeps reoffending. He is currently in prison now, serving a sentence because they found child images on his computer, he kept releasing his identity. Like, there's actually pictures online. If you dig far enough, you can find pictures of this guy online and what he looks like now. But essentially, he kept releasing his own identity, and then they kept having to give him a new one. Because basically, everyone is out for blood. Everyone wants them dead, apart from Denise. Denise is like, no, I don't want you doing that because I don't want to tarnish James's name. Like, I don't want to be like them. So I commend her for that. Personally, I say... the other one hasn't reoffended, but it still makes me mad. But the one who keeps reoffending, that literally is a nonce, string him up by his balls. Literally, I am all for integrating people back into society and trying to rehabilitate people. I think rehabilitation is really important. There are just some people, especially nonces, who are into children. You cannot rehabilitate these people, and you cannot change my mind on that. And that is all I'm going to say. So then the next book that I read in June was The Deal by Elle Kennedy. This is a college sports hockey romance series. And the first book is essentially following this girl whose name I can't remember. I think it might be Hannah. I could be wrong. But she essentially has this crush on this guy who is, I think he's a football star of some sort. She has a major crush on him, but she's never spoken to him. And she's not very popular. Like, she's not in that crowd. She kind of keeps to herself. And so one day, she enlists the help of Garrett, who she ends up tutoring, and in return, he will help her get the kind of like street cred that she needs for this popular guy to notice her, and then hopefully she can date him. But along the way, this kind of like friends with benefits situation ends up becoming something a little bit more serious. So the first thing that I'll say, this is a very popular series, and I will say that I don't feel like it's aged very well. There's some really cringy dialogue in here, and it shows when it was written. I just think that because this was written at a time when new adult wasn't really a genre. I don't really feel like it's a massive genre now. People don't really say new adult, but this was at a time when people were calling out for books written about people in their early 20s or in their late teens that are in college, and people were like, we need new adult. And so like this was one of the books that, you know, came out and people were like, oh, new adult, you know. But it definitely showed with kind of like the cringy dialogue and also the overall plot, because when you compare it to sports romance books that you can get now, or not even just sports romance books, but I would say kind of like romance books in general that are set around characters in their 20s, it shows how poorly this one is compared to those ones. Just feel like the other ones are much more well done now, and you can tell. I will also say that Garrett's character in this book was very conflicting, because whilst he is supposed to be this really sweet guy that cares about, you know, women and whatever, he also comes across really misogynistic. Like, he says these little things sometimes that is, oh, he's such a frat bro. He's such a frat bro, and it shows. There's just things that he'll make little comments, and I'm like, bro, you sound like such a pig right now. You're supposed to be this likeable character who's supposed to be so sweet and caring and lovable and whatever, but you aren't giving those vibes. You are giving frat bro vibes, and I'm not here for that. I will also say the conflict felt very rushed. It almost felt like the conflict was kind of gearing itself up towards the end of the book, and then it happened very, very quickly. It was all wrapped up in a nice, neat little bow, and then it was done, and I was left kind of feeling a little bit disappointed, because it felt like the kind of conflict that could either go on throughout a couple of books, or at least extend it a little bit and actually have this conflict play out on paper. It didn't. It was almost one of those ones where it plays off camera, you know, and you're just left there to fill in the spaces, which I didn't love. But overall, it was a fun little read, and I'll definitely be reading on with the series. I just think it was easy and fast paced. It was nothing crazy. So I did end up giving this one 3 stars. So then the last book that I read in June was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. When I tell you, I was so excited to read this, and to the person who recommended that I read this, thank you so much. This is what I wanted. Anyone who's got any recommendations for some really good sci-fi books, especially ones that they enjoyed and they enjoyed Dark Matter, let me know, because I love this book. So in this book, you are essentially following this guy who is walking home one night from a bar, and he ends up having someone come up behind him, and the last words he hears is, "Are you happy with your life?" And at that point he ends up waking up on a gurney with like no recollection of, you know, why he's there, where he is, or what the fuck is going on. It's a very, I would say it's a very suspenseful sci-fi book. First of all, this is exactly the kind of mind-boggling shit that I love. It was definitely giving kind of like 172 Hours on the Moon vibe, which, if anyone's read that book, that was a really good like YA sci-fi that I read like years and years ago. Really twisty, really mind-fucky. This was amazing. This is the kind of book that makes you go into an existential crisis, because you sit there and you are questioning everything. Like, this is, honestly, this is the kind of book that could send you into a massive spiral. I did find this book really engaging because of all the different settings, and I was always really kind of excited to see what would happen next. And it did keep me on my toes. However, I will say I did guess kind of like the major plot twist that was kind of like going on. I did feel like it was a little bit obvious. It does kind of give that vibe when you're reading it, and so you just kind of guess it straight away what's going to happen. I will say some of Jason's decisions really fucked me off. Really fucked me off. There was like one particular scene that I can think of that happened, and I was just like, what the fuck are you doing? You are so stupid. You've just told this person not to do that, and yet you are doing this. You are doing it now. And I guess I can understand why, because everything was getting kind of crazy, but at the same time, stop it. Like, listen to your own advice. And the other thing that I will say is I did find the ending a little bit disappointing, which really sucked, because the book overall was really great. Like, it was really fun, it was exciting, it was fast paced, I loved what was going on, it was mindfuck central, but the ending just, the ending was just, ugh. I mean, it was one of those the only thing I liked about the ending was that it was open-ended, so you can kind of imagine where it would go from there, and you could get several different endings if you wanted. But I just didn't like the ending overall. I felt kind of unsatisfied for once, which kind of sucked. But overall, I ended up giving Dark Matter 4 stars, and I absolutely loved it, and I would highly, highly recommend it if you haven't read it before. I've decided to put the fan down because that was it. Those were the books that I read in the month of June. If you've read any of the books that I did, then let me know what you thought of them in the comments. If not, let me know what your favourite or least favourite book was that you read in June. I would love to know. If you enjoyed this video and my sweaty face, because I literally feel like I am melting right now, then please give this video a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content from me when I'm not waving a fan, hopefully, then please do subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. So bye guys.